Hey guys, welcome back to Good Moral Tactical. This is Colton. Today we're going to do an interview with a friend of mine. Her name is Bryana, and I'll let her introduce herself to you guys. But I think we're going to have some really good topics about self-defense, the firearms industry, and then the tactical games, which we've kind of already talked about with other things in the past. So I'll go ahead and flip it over to her and let her introduce herself.
Guys, I'm Brianna. I live in Texas. I'm a single mom to three kids, five and under. Um, and I've been doing self-defense for 4.5 years now. I started when I moved here to Texas, which was 4.5 years ago. So it doesn't seem like a long time, but it feels like forever for me. I come from uh, a family of, I would say, I have a couple uncles who are SWAT officers, a lot of firefighters. So the world isn't new to me, but at the same time, I was born and raised in New Jersey, so guns weren't really a thing. And then I lived in California for 6 years, so guns also were not a thing in California. And then I entered Texas, and obviously guns are a big thing here. So
That is definitely an interesting transition of going from very
yeah,
restrictive states to Texas.
yeah.
But yeah, so I know we had kind of gotten connected through the tactical games, and
Hmm.
you've been doing the tactical games for much longer than I have, and you've
Yeah.
done extremely well in the tactical. So, I won't really talk on that, but you can kind of go into it for yourself because I know you've placed 6 times, right?
Yeah, 6 out of 6.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I cannot say the same. I was 19 out of 28 for my first one. So, but I'll take it. Learning curve, very first
For
one that
sure,
I
for
did.
sure.
So, what kind of brought you into going into the self-defense industry? Because you had talked about that you do that as your current
Hmm.
career, and then the
Yep.
tactical games are just kind of on the side for you.
Yeah.
What brought you into that path?
So in 2020, when I was living in California, um, I experienced a domestic violence dispute. Took me a little bit off guard. And I realized in that moment that I never wanted to feel like that again. So I moved here to Texas, probably 7 months later, and I was in Home Depot, and I realized a guy like lifted up to grab a piece of wood, and I saw him conceal carrying.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, all right, like I can do this, but like I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I want to learn. So I did my research, and I found an indoor range here in Austin that had a trainer who specialized in personal security. And I was like, all right, let me give that a try. So I went to him and I started to learn. I started to learn about guns. I had never put my hand on a gun ever. I did a lot of classroom work, a lot of dry firing with him before I went into the range. Um, and learned, the ins and outs of just how to protect myself and protect my kids. Um, and then I started training with him, shooting inside this indoor range. And I trained 3 days a week for about 2 years straight. I never missed a beat. I basically spent my life savings on this training. And in the middle of the training, I actually got pregnant with my third child. And I remember crying because I was like, how am I going to continue to train? At around 18 weeks, the doctor had recommended that I stop training indoors because of the lead levels and the noise, but there's not really a great outdoor range around here. So I was like, well, and that's where I learned to dry fire because that is all that I did. It was me, my bedroom, and some cardboard targets on the wall, and I would just practice. And then after I had my third child, I went back into training about 2 weeks postpartum, and I've been doing that ever since. So that domestic dispute, and then just the Texas lifestyle in general is what really led me to wanting to learn how to protect myself and my kids.
Yeah. I think there's two kind of groups that you have. The group that has experienced the trauma, and
Mhm.
then the group that knows someone who's experienced trauma
Yeah,
and doesn't want it to happen to them. And I think
exactly.
that's the category that I was in personally, because
Hmm.
my brother was, or well, is a police officer, and I have a lot of family that were police officers. I always heard the horror stories and the
For
what
sure.
ifs could potentially happen. And so as soon
Hmm.
as I came of age, that was always like, I'm going to do this. It's not a question. I'm going to do it. And then you have the stories where people, they never came into that lifestyle. The lifestyle kind of finds them after
Yes.
an incident.
Yeah.
And so I know for me, whenever it came to learning how to shoot firearms and pick my accessories, it was all kind of, I just had the pick of the litter because I didn't really need to think of scenarios of how to protect myself. I was like, I'm just going to buy this one because it looks cool. I'm just going
Yeah.
to get this holster because it fits it. Like that,
Yeah.
that was how I came into it. And it sounds like you had something a little bit different with
Mhm.
the research that you did. So, how do you kind of decide what you're going to do with concealed carry and the kind of equipment that you're going to be using?
So that was, all something that I learned from my trainer. I will give him a lot of credit for any of my success in the career, in the games, so on and so forth. So I personally always carry a 9 millimeter. I own a couple 380s. I don't recommend them. They are tiny. They have a lot of kick to them. And I personally cannot stand mine. Right.
Mhm.
So when I'm talking to other women, just like we can relate to each other by being parents, I think it's nice I can relate to other women, right? Because I am a female. And so I always recommend them shooting first,
Mhm.
and I will let them shoot the 9 millimeters that I conceal carry, and then let them go from there. I will let them shoot that 380 because, they're like, oh, well, we want to try a tiny weapon. And I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, knock yourself out. They fire one round. They're like, no, never mind.
Yeah.
So I, I will tell all of my students, I recommend shooting and concealing a 9 millimeter. I will leave that option up to you. But here, shoot what I have, and then make that decision from there.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really good because I think a lot of people, when they start working with females, they almost are like, oh, you're fragile. We're going to give
Mhm.
you the smaller calibers.
Mhm.
And I've personally never liked that approach. And I personally don't love how the market is starting to create a lot of 22
Mhm.
caliber concealed carries to
Yeah,
be like the new hot stuff. And I feel like they're really being marketed towards people with smaller hands and everything like that. Because
absolutely.
there's not really stopping power. So like
No,
hearing you say 9 millimeter is still the one, there's a reason that 9 millimeter is still the standard for law enforcement, FBI,
absolutely.
and everything like
Yeah.
that. It's effective. It has the most
Mhm.
capacity that you can, and there's so many different platforms that use that one cartridge, and it's readily
Absolutely.
available.
Hmm.
I know during 2020, trying to go and get 380 was almost impossible.
Hmm.
It was like you're either going to find 9 millimeter or 308. And those were the only two that you were ever
Yeah.
going to find anywhere.
Hmm.
So it's really,
I
really good.
I think with women too, when it comes to self-defense and it comes to concealment, I tell all my students, I had a couple students today, not everyone is going to be capable of concealing or quote unquote protecting themselves, even though they may want to.
Mhm.
Um, self-defense situations aren't you dry firing in your bedroom, right? Your heart rate's going to spike. Your mind's not going to be right. So you need to be honest with yourself, as a female, like, am I capable of doing this? Am I capable of pulling the trigger? Am I capable of carrying a loaded firearm? Because the number one rule for me and all my students is never carry an unloaded firearm. If
Mhm.
you are carrying a gun that doesn't have a round in it, doesn't have a magazine in it, and you're being robbed at gunpoint, your mind goes goodbye, and you're like, oh, I have my gun. You
Yep.
pull it. If they're armed, you're getting shot, and there's that, right? Um, Civilians, you're in Target and you're shopping, and someone decides to, I don't know, shoot up Target. Unfortunately, that's the world that we live in today. And your heart's going, your mind leaves, and now you've got a bunch of people running for their lives, but you're over here like, oh, I have a gun, I can protect myself,
Yep.
and all of these people Well, the reality is you probably can't. You're probably going to take a shot, miss, and or hit a civilian. And then, there comes the law for you. Or understanding the state laws. What state do you live in? What are the laws that, are in place for you to protect yourself? Do you know them? Can you go and chase someone off your driveway and start shooting at them when they're, I don't know, quarter mile away just because they were on your lawn 20 minutes prior? No. But people don't think that way.
A lot of people have
And
hero complexes where they're
exactly.
like they make up the scenario in their head. They're like, this is exactly what I would do.
Yep.
And unfortunately, we just got finished with witnessing a case that happened in New York
Hmm.
with Mr. Penny and what he had to do on the subway. That
Yep.
unfortunately ended in someone passing away, but he was protecting someone else. And because he was not the direct victim of it,
Hmm.
he had to be arrested and had to go
Hmm.
through a long, dragged out case.
Yep.
Granted, that was also probably because of where he was located
Absolutely.
compared
But
to
right,
others.
that's key.
Yes.
And, obviously being here in Texas, I, go over all of that stuff with my students, but I need them to understand that you're not John Wick. This isn't Law and Order SVU. Everything is not going to pan out like the TV shows.
Mhm.
This is real life and you need to be smart. And if you don't train, you shouldn't be carrying. If you're not training for, accuracy in the range, you're not dry firing, you're not putting in the work that needs to be done in order to be able to protect yourself in those situations, you shouldn't be carrying, period.
That
Um,
I agree with that. I've
mhm,
seen a lot of concealed classes where there will be someone and it's it's not they're hitting the A zone on a target. It's like they're
mhm,
hitting like the C zone and like the
mhm.
very border, and they're like, no, we'll still pass you. And I'm just, are we sure that we should pass when you're hitting C's? Because if
Yeah.
you're that far out, what is it going to be like whenever your adrenaline's pumping?
Well, and the reality is, right, getting an LTC here in Texas, we have constitutional carry. Now, granted, if people would pay a little bit of attention when constitutional carry was passed, businesses got a little bit smart, right? So now we've got our signs on, businesses normally on the bottom right hand corner that tells you if you can carry as a licensed carrier. And if you don't have your license, there'll be a sign that says that. Now, granted, no one looks at the bottom of the door. So I'm sure that John and Joe are carrying, even though they shouldn't be. Um, with that being said, that that deterred a lot of people too from going, and they're like, oh no, like everyone's carrying, I'm scared. The reality is that the people carrying, I promise, probably aren't like, there is definitely good people that are carrying, but that doesn't mean that they are in the headspace or they have the training to protect target, right? um the LTC test here is absolutely ridiculous. I could literally give it to my 6-year-old out there and she would probably pass with like an 80%, right? Some of the questions are absolutely ridiculous. The shooting portion, the target is gigantic.
Yep.
In my opinion, a very inexperienced shooter could pass both on their first try. And so now we have our LTC, right? We can carry everywhere. For what purpose, though? What is the point of concealed carrying? To be able to protect yourself and your family, your children. If you are hitting C's, you're missing paper, you're not protecting anyone, period. And that's something that I drill into all my students. When I do big seminars, I actually do a lot of our drills that we do, I call games. And I call them games so that they understand this is not how it's going to happen in real life. Um, this is a game here,
Mhm.
and you're not John Wick.
Yep.
So,
And I'm glad that you bring up drills,
yeah.
because I think that's a lot of things. A lot of times when you take someone to the range who they're not in the lifestyle, they're like maybe enthusiasts and they
Mhm.
like it, but they don't go into it hardcore like we do.
Yeah.
They're like, what do you mean a drill? All I'm going to do is I'm going to put the target down range. I'm going to stand in one spot and I'm just going to
Mhm.
shoot straight. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's not everything we need to work on. We need to work on side to side. We need to,
Mhm.
go to different barrels and locations and work on drawing from the holster, the
Yeah.
whole nine. Make it effective with your time. Don't spend, what is it, for 100 rounds, like $30 a 9 millimeter for a
Yes.
hundred rounds. Like, I'm not gonna just waste $30 going to the range for fun when I can actually like work on it.
Absolutely.
And so I know about drills. A lot
Hmm.
of other people, they don't know drills until either I work with them or I send them a link.
Yeah.
Where do you find your drills, and what are
Hmm.
some of like your favorite drills that you run with your students?
For self-defense situations, so for me, you need to make it to that point, right? So I have different levels of classes. I ran a level one today. My level one is basically in a classroom setting. You have empty guns. I use mantises. I get them accustomed to holding the gun, proper stance, proper grip, proper trigger pull, not breaking their wrists, not slapping their trigger. Now, granted, we're not, shooting live rounds, so it's always going to be different. But I want to be able to bring my student into a level two, which is range time, and have them be able to pick up that gun, get their grip correctly, know how to align their sights. I'm not trying to do that in the range. That is dangerous,
Yep.
and I won't do it. So if you don't take a level one with me, I don't do level twos. The only way I allow that is if you can prove to me somehow, like let's say you did the tactical games and you just wanted some extra training. At least at that point, I know you've shot a weapon, safety, at least that I hope so, right? And I'd feel better bringing you to at the range. When it comes to drills, so I'll just give the example. I have an older student. He's about, I don't know, 65 years old. And he's been with me for some bit now. And when I take him to the range, he's obviously doing this for self-defense. He's not going to go join the tactical games. And right now we are still working on accuracy. I start with accuracy. If you can't shoot accurately, you're with a lower heart rate, you're sure and shit not going to shoot accurately with a higher heart rate, right? So we're in this indoor range. Why? Brianna, why do we have to go to this crappy indoor range? Well, I attribute a lot of my success to this crappy indoor range because one, it's cold when it's cold out, it's hot when it's hot out, and it's loud as all hell, right? Three things that are going to make someone that's new to firearms very uncomfortable. I'm shivering, I'm sweating. Oh no, like John in lane 5 is now shooting his 12 gauge and now you're jumping, right? I like that for self-defense students. I want them to be quote unquote as uncomfortable as possible without obviously putting them in a dangerous situation. So with this student, like I said, he's been with me for a little while. Once I got him to be accurate within a 6-inch circle at 5 yards, I moved him back a little bit, and then we are working double taps. Why? Well, in a self-defense situation, I don't want you blowing 12 bullets at someone, missing all of them, or honestly, I don't want you blowing 12 rounds through someone, period, because that just looks a little wonky, right? So we worked double taps, and then we worked double taps with a shot timer. I put the holster on the table first, and I have him bring the gun up to his eyes. I don't want his head moving around, and I have him, tap, tap. And we get a certain time and I get him comfortable with that. And then we'll move on to putting the holster in his waistband and going from there. I have special privileges at this range because I was trained. The owner was my trainer. But a lot of ranges won't allow that. They don't allow you to draw from the holster unless you're on like an outdoor range. So I'm very lucky. But that small progression with the shot timers are used for so much more than just, your bill drill. And I use them with all of my students. And then if they're comfortable enough and they want to continue to, move up, I will take them to an outdoor range where we learn how to move and shoot. We learn, there's the barrel, how to go to the side, take a shot and come back without jamming up, how to move down a line of steel without tripping over themselves. Different things like that. And that's honestly all up to the student. And people ask me, what's the progression? Like, how quickly can I get outside? That's on a student, the time, the effort that they put in. And everyone's different. Not everyone's going to make it there. Actually, I would say probably 80% won't make it there.
I think a lot of people are very accustomed to just the stationary shooting
Mhm.
in lanes,
Yeah,
and that's okay. You and I are more accustomed to the, dynamic world of
for
doing
sure.
the moving, and I feel like that is good for people that they want to take it serious and
Absolutely.
have that preparedness for
I,
self-defense.
yep.
But look, like you said, 80% of people probably are they just don't have that comfort level of
Mhm. And
coordination.
that's okay. But
That's
I
okay.
want people to know that, inhale it, and be like, okay, I was not meant for this. And then, like we'll probably talk about, then let's learn other techniques, right, to
Yeah.
defend yourself. Not everyone is going to be a gun person, and that is okay. But to be able to, swallow your pride and be like, I can't do this. I have respect for those people. I have respect for the people that will not carry because they know that they're probably going to miss and hit a civilian, right? And when it comes to seminars, so I will do self defense seminars, which is all dry fire. There's no live shooting in those. I will run my games, my drills. I actually have a self defense instructor. She will come in. I have wooden rifles, and she will come in with like a wooden rifle, and she'll just walk. And so I have people stand in a line and I have them run. I normally do them in CrossFit gyms, oddly enough, and I'll set up boxes. And I leave a little tiny space, normally in the middle. Depending on what I'm using, there might be a space in the bottom, and obviously there's spaces on the sides, right? I don't say a word. I
Mhm.
don't say a word because I'm not trying to give hints. I'm trying to get people to understand all the mistakes that they're going to make in these real life situations, right? I put a mantis on the guns, and prior to these games, I have people shoot stationary,
Mhm.
and you'll see people pick up, now they're shooting like they're getting 85% on the mantis
Yeah.
and they're all excited, right? You put them in this literally unrealistic situation. It's not real.
Mhm.
Um, with no loaded firearms and a wooden rifle, and their 85% drops to a 2%.
Yeah.
I have had one student shoot over on the mantis, right? Shoot 75% in one of these drills. Everyone else is 10% or below. And that's with a fake wooden rifle, right? So I have them stand in a line, and then they're supposed to protect themselves. What are you doing? Someone is now in the store. Protect yourself.
Mhm.
The biggest thing that I've seen, people walk. So people will literally walk to take cover,
Yeah.
hide behind. And so in the back of my head, I sit there and I smile and whatever. And then they stick their whole head outside of those boxes and take their shot. I let them do it. I tell them they got a 2%. And then I say, you walked and you stuck your whole head out the side.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, right. And I'm like, well, you're obviously not going to walk just right by the shooter, hey, and then, get behind the box. And you're sure and shit not going to stick your whole head out of it, the side, right? Um, you'll get people that want to use that bottom space. They lay their whole body down and then they stick their whole head out the side while they're laying down,
Yeah.
right? These are all mistakes that are normal, but it gets people to realize, wow, I probably would not have any idea what to do in these situations. Um, or wow, I really slapped the trigger on that because I was so damn nervous and the rifle's wooden. Um, and people are watching you, right? So I like that too because sure you feel the social pressure of people watching you. How are you going to feel when there's real lives at risk?
Yeah.
There's moms and dads in the store with babies, and you think that you're a hero or you're trying to be a hero. And in reality, you could ruin, maybe they stay safe, and maybe you bring attention to yourself by sticking your whole head out the side, and now they're not safe, right? So there's a lot of moving parts to self-defense. And I just think that a big problem is that everyone wants to be a hero.
So I definitely like to hear what you're doing with the self-defense because everybody does think that they're a hero in their own mind. And
Mhm.
I think that's one thing as a society, we all kind of
Mhm.
are selfish almost. And we think of
Mhm.
ourselves as like, oh, we're these great big heroes and we can do anything that we want until you're in those situations. And a lot
Mhm.
of people are never going to be in those situations.
No.
And so until you actually have someone push you to know what you're capable of, you're always going to have that fantasy. So I like to hear that maybe breaking dreams is not the best way of putting it, but
Mhm.
bringing people into a more realistic vision of
Yes.
what they're capable of.
Uh-huh.
Because I know that I've had that growing up. I was definitely the guy that was like, oh, I could have totally been a SEAL. I could have done this. Like
Yeah.
I could have done amazing. And then my first tactical games, I met Brandon, who's 40 plus, and there's me
Yeah.
in my 20s, and I watch him crushing things, and I'm just like, I suck. Like,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
what is this?
Well, it's funny because we're always like, the news has such an influence, social media has such an influence on people. It sounds silly, but shit like Law and Order, SWAT, I don't know, any of those TV shows
Yep.
totally has an influence on people.
Yep.
They
I
watch
think
it.
CSI was the biggest one for my family household. They're like, "Oh yeah, criminals get found all the time. Like
Yeah.
this is how shootouts happen. Like I know how to do this." And then, family members become police officers and they're like, "If you ever do anything on that show, I will slap you silly."
Well, it's funny because I'm in a very serious relationship with a canine officer, but he's been a cop for 15 years. He was prior SWAT. And my favorite thing to do is when we watch these shows, you know, he gets so angry at the TV, but like he'll, in the show, they shoot the bad guy and the person dies immediately.
Yeah.
Within like 0.5 seconds, they're dead. And he's like, that doesn't happen. So, it those type of shows I watched growing up. And I think that maybe they made me want to be something.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I was able to realize that that's not reality.
Yeah.
And, I've worked hard for where I am.
Yeah. So I know that we're kind of, going on the whole hero thing of self-defense scenarios, but in my mind, and to a few different people, I think they would kind of put you in that category of being heroistic and doing the
Mhm.
tactical games. I mean, you
Yeah.
said it at the beginning of this, you've played 6 times out of 6 times of doing it. That's
Yeah.
pretty good.
Yeah.
So how did you come to get into the tactical games? How did you find it? What really brought you into wanting to do that?
When I decided that, so I've always wanted to be a cop. Well, we'll start that. We'll put that out there. Um, and I decided that being a mom was more important. Um, so I decided to have the 3 kids or whatever. And then at that time, the world had kind of gone to shit, and I just didn't think being a cop was the smartest decision. That's what led me. Obviously, I always had that interest that led me into getting my master's. I have my master's in law enforcement and criminal intelligence. And honestly, it was the best 2 years ever. In the respect of like, I loved everything I learned. I loved everything that I, was doing. I enjoyed writing 20-page papers. And that's when you really know that you love something, right?
I was gonna say that
So
you sound like a psychopath saying that you like writing 20-page papers. I ain't
I
gonna.
did. Because I loved learning the information, right? Big on the intelligence end. I love knowing why. Why did someone do that? What caused them? What trauma did they go through? Did they go through any trauma? Or are they just hardwired differently, right? So that I did that, right? Um, then I did the self-defense, went to that trainer. I also started fighting when I started the self-defense with the firearm trainer. I started fighting Krav Maga. Um, there was a small studio here, and I was like, why not? So that's when I started that. And that obviously ties into my business. But during firearm training, my trainer pulled up the tactical games, pulled up this big screen, and Kalarina was the first female that I saw like broadcasted.
Mhm.
And I looked at my trainer and I said, "You're out of your motherfucking mind."
Mhm.
I said, "I am not doing that." I said, "I am 5'2". I said, "I am tiny and she'll kick my ass. I'm not doing it." And he was like, "Why not?" I was like, "Because I don't want to." Now, obviously, I didn't realize that there was different divisions. You can start at the bottom, work your way up, so on and so forth. But then I saw Blair. Blair is one of my best friends now. And I remember seeing a video or something of her, and I was like, "No, It's not happening. I was like, she's got to be 5'8". She
Mhm.
will fucking squish me. I'm not doing it. And it's so funny now because I look back and they're all really good friends of mine. But I was just like, you know what? Let me try. So I went to athlete camp. And well, I volunteered first. So I did volunteer at a Texas event and I met Megan Kennedy. And I met her wife, Vanessa. And Megan is really the one that made me want to do it. I felt like I was like fangirling over Megan, and I
Mhm.
laugh now. Um, but I just I kind of wanted to be like Megan, you know?
Mhm.
She'll laugh. She would laugh if she heard me say that. And so then I decided to do athlete camp. And Megan was at athlete camp. Kirk Homer did athlete camp. Zach or Thor was there. Carla, Hepner, Sal, they were all really the teachers that year. And I learned so much. I knew going in, I knew, the fundamentals of shooting. I knew that I could shoot decently, but I had never shot under stress before. And like shooting through a VTAC or long range, any of that stuff was all new to me. But I'm a very competitive person and I was not going to go to a first event blind. So I laid out the money and I'll
Mhm.
never regret that money lost.
I wish I had done that. I did the opposite. I went in blind. I was like, you know what? We're just gonna sign up. We're gonna do it, and we're gonna see what
But
happens.
you know what? I would tell anyone
Mhm.
to do that. I just knew myself and I knew that I'd be so pissed off at myself if I didn't go in prepared because that's who I am as a person. But like I wish that I could have just went for it. I'll tell anyone, just go
Mhm.
for it. Use your Glock that you have in your safe and just go and do it. Because it's not about all the trophies, right? It's the
Yeah.
community of people, I'm sure, as you've realized. They're family to me now. Um, and even if I fall off the podium for the next 2 years, I'll still continue to do it because I love the people and I love the community. But yeah, that's really how I got into it. I saw, my trainer pulled it up on the TV and I was like, all right, fine, I'll give it
Yeah.
a shot. And we did. And I ran an extra 2 miles on my first ever event because I got lost and I was a little bit traumatized, but we kept going.
Hey, it is what it is. I fell off of a shipping container and almost broke my ankle on mine. So,
Okay. All right. There we go.
I'll take the getting lost over breaking an ankle. Just saying.
No, no. See, there was a homeless guy that
Okay,
year.
the story's going south.
Yeah. And so I don't know what happened, but I feel like people trampled over the flags that like,
Mhm.
gave you direction. And I believe I made a right. And I was running and in the back of my head, I was like, I don't think that Nick would send us this way.
Yeah.
And I got to the homeless guy and I was like, Nick definitely wanted to send us this way. So I turned around and Jake Mazzell was um, working for the games at the time. And I remember hearing him scream and going like this. And I was like, fuck, like I went the wrong way. And I was like, this is going to ruin it for me.
Yeah.
And so I had to like dart through this field in Utah. And I was like, oh my God, there's going to be a fucking snake come out. I was like waiting for something else to go wrong. And then by the time I got back, Vanessa and Megan were at my first event, and Vanessa actually ran down and ran back up with me. Um, and I knew right then and there that the community was special because you didn't need to do that, right?
Yep.
And I ran back up and looked at my watch, and I think I clocked like 5.2 miles, and I'm pretty sure that run was like 3.5. So
Yeah.
I was pretty pissed. But I've never gotten lost again. So
Hey, there you go. You learned your lesson.
you do,
But
you do.
I kind of had similar, not getting lost, but Brandon really helped me get through that first event. Because for anybody who doesn't know, everybody who's competing has to judge the person that
Mm-hmm.
is in the same lane as them. That
Yeah.
was news to me. I did not know. So I get there and they're like, hey, you've never done this event before. You're going to be watching this guy and you're going to
Yeah.
have to judge whether or not he's doing everything right. And I'm just
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my God, I'm going to like fuck this dude's score up. Like this is
Yeah, yeah,
not going
yeah.
to be good. And that's when
Mm-hmm.
I met Brandon, who I, had to judge him. And then he ended up judging me whenever it was my turn. And he was just like the coolest guy.
Brandon's
And
awesome.
and so like I'm like watching him through the first stage. I was like, this guy can do it. I can do it. And literally was cheering me on. Never met me
Mhm.
before and is already cheering me on because he's judging me.
Yep.
And then throughout the entire event, I just keep going up to him. I'm like, hey, what did you see whenever you were having to do your run? Is there anything? And then he would ask me on the second day, whenever I was going before him, he was like, hey, when you're going over this, what are you seeing about having to like kick your leg over and everything?
Hmm.
And that was just so cool to me because I feel like in my specific world of, I'll just say it, white collar jobs,
Yeah.
everybody is very selfish in
Hmm.
like, oh, I'm gonna keep into my own little world. I'm gonna
For
focus
sure.
on me, and I'm not gonna help you develop and anything like
Hmm.
that. So to come to this and guy I've never met before is like, hey, do this to try
Yep.
and help yourself get better and like actively cheering me on was just so cool because I remember at the end of my event I went home and talked to some of my family. It's like, here, let me show you some videos of what I was doing this weekend. They're like, why would you want to be running in the wood? I'm like, why the fuck
Yeah.
wouldn't I? Like, this is
Yeah.
cool. Like, I'm
Uh-huh.
not sitting on the couch just
Hmm.
watching football, wasting my life away when
Hmm.
I'm actually out doing something that I said I
For
was going to
sure.
do for 5 years,
Yep.
and random people are cheering me on. Like
Hmm.
that was so cool to me.
Yeah, it is, and it's definitely something special. I will give I will give Nick and Amanda a lot of credit because I think that they create such a family environment. They're two of the most amazing people I've ever met. They make you feel like family right from the get-go, and then everyone kind of feeds off of that energy, right? No one wants you at the tactical games if you're there to be a dick. We're one family, and I think that we all have similarities, right? We can all bond over certain things, the love for guns or, the love for doing something quote unquote batshit crazy for 48 hours.
Yep.
Like, I know for me, I have a very strong personality. I'm from the East Coast, right? I'm from Jersey. I'm not everyone's quote unquote cup of tea. But when I went to the games, I kind of felt like I met my people. I'd be okay literally not having any other friends outside of the people in the games.
Going into a more, let's say, technical aspect of the tactical games,
Mhm.
you kind of touched onto it of like just go into it with your very first thing, and that's what I did. I went with steel
Mhm.
plates, which I regret to this day because they crushed me. Every time I would like go over something, I was like, I can't breathe. This
I
sucks.
had steel plates for my first event as well.
So, how do you kind of go about discerning your equipment that you're using for the tactical games?
Process of elimination. I feel like I started with steel plates, right? I got a plate carrier. I believe I run a Javelin Concepts plate carrier. Um, and I love it. I'm tiny, right? So I think that the biggest problem I have with at least my plate carrier is I don't have a big torso. So my belt kind of sometimes there's no room in between. Um, but it's not something that I'm like, oh my God, I need a new plate carrier right now. Um, so I still stick to that. I did change to jackrabbit plates because of the being uncomfortable, right, with the steel plates. My belt is a G code belt. It's the first belt that I got. My trainer recommended it to me, and at that point, I knew no better. So I was like, screw it. I know people that use belts off of Amazon, though, right?
Yeah.
So my G code belt is a little bit more on the expensive side, but it still holds too. My first ever weapon that I ran at the games was a Walther. I got it on consignment at the gun shop. It was used, but I knew it was a competition gun, and I was like, okay. So I trained with that, and that's what I used until I started the games and saw the whole staccato ordeal, and I was like,
Yeah.
I want one of those. And then I found someone selling it, so I got a staccato from a ex-Navy SEAL, and I've been using that ever since. Um, Rifle, I was shooting a Saint and I switched over to 5150. They gave me a rifle, but I probably am going back to my Saint. I seem to be having some issues with my 5150. And I loved it. And that's I just walked into the gun store and was like, oh, that looks nice. I need a rifle. And, I don't really think it's sure, like a staccato obviously has its advantages. The trigger is amazing. It's just a really, really good weapon. But there are females out there that kick ass using a Glock. Um, so it for me, it's about your training. You can start with the lowest of low things and still do wonderful. My dad always used to say growing up, I was a competitive swimmer my whole life. And he always used to say, who wants it more? Right. So if you're going out there to compete, who wants it more? And it's just not who wants it more when you're actually competing. What are you doing in your free time to get yourself to that level of success? And if you can't or you don't want to, well, then you can't expect to reap the results of someone that is going to put in the work, right?
Going back to what we said about the hero thing with self-defense, a lot of people do the same thing when they are like, oh yeah, I'm going to enter this competition. I'm going to win it the very 1st time. And then they sit around and they
Yeah,
don't
for sure.
really prepare themselves or what they're supposed to do. So with training for the tactical games, a lot of people who get into tactical games are like, oh, I'm going there to shoot because it's a shooting competition. And they don't realize just how much fitness there is to it. What did you do to try and get into better, I'll just say like physical capabilities for the weights and the cardio part of the tactical games?
So when I started the games, I was actually only 6 months postpartum. So I like this question because I think it goes to show that, you can do the games in maybe not the best condition. But in order to prepare myself, I did Hepner's program. I did Hepner's program and I did Sal's dry fire. I wanted to do well. And so I was willing to spend that money. And Hepner's program put me in probably one of the best shapes that I've ever been in. It wasn't easy. I had a newborn at home, right? And 2 other children. So I wouldn't say that I was like a 7-day-a-weeker. I did it when I could. And then eventually I kind of weaned off and just joined a CrossFit gym. And sometimes I will, ask a friend like, oh, what did Hep have program today? And I'll like maybe shove that in on like a Friday or a Saturday. I think that the biggest thing for me was realizing how much endurance I needed. It's not just about the weights, right? It's you're throwing a 100-pound sandbag for 5 minutes. It's different than picking up a 100-pound sandbag and holding it. I think it's funny because you will see videos of people I've posted them. I can pick up a 150. That sure and shit doesn't mean I'm working with that 150 for an 8-minute, or 12 to 15-minute workout. And so I think that's also important for people to realize, if you want to get into the games and you're going on the internet and you're like, I can't do that. You see someone throwing around a 150. I can't do that. I don't want to try. I promise you, they're probably not throwing around that 150 for 8 minutes. Unless you're watching the best of the best. You're watching Janae on the internet, or you're watching, Blair. Yes, they work really freaking hard and they can throw around that bag for 8 minutes, but most people can't. So just because you see them doing it on Instagram, don't be discouraged, because when you get into the field, it's going to look a lot different.
Yeah, I know for me, I was like, oh, okay, I can squat 250 pounds. I can bench press 180.
Yeah.
And then as soon as we got into the time of doing the 100-pound sandbag tombstones,
Yeah.
we were having to like do the squats with them and touch them to the ground for 3-minute intervals and then stop, shoot, and then come right back to it. I was like, I did not do that. I just was like, can I pick it up? I can pick it up. I did not do it for 15 minutes.
Exactly. Yeah, that's definitely something that I feel like people, should know. I will recommend nothing other than Hepner's program. Sure, a general CrossFit is going to help you, but Hepner's program is for the games, right? It's for that 8 minutes of working with that, or 12 minutes of working with that 100-pound sandbag. It's not to lift it and then drop it and go home.
I think that pretty much covers all the generic questions that we really have with it. We definitely appreciate your time and kind of talking about these things. And hopefully we'll be able to get together at one of the events that's coming up in 2025.